So in this video, we are going to talk about supply and demand, and specifically how it applies to sports economics. And so, demand. Going back to your more basic economics courses, demand is the relationship between the price of a good and the quantity demanded of a good or service. Okay. There's the law of demand. And the law of demand states that the relationship between the price and the quantity demanded is negative, meaning that as price goes up, the quantity demanded goes down. As price goes down, the quantity demanded goes up. Okay. And so you can see in these two graphs here, you have the downward sloping demand. So that's demand. What about supply? Supply, on the other hand, is a relationship between the price of a good and the quantity supplied. And with supply, the law of supply states the opposite of the law of demand, which is that as price goes up, the quantity supplied goes up. As price goes down, the quantity supplied goes down. What it means is there's a positive relationship. And so you have the upward sloping supply curve, which is shown in both of these graphs here. Okay. So supply, demand, they're just relationships. They tell you at each price how many units supplied or how many units demanded, or how many units are supplied or how many units are demanded. It is not until the two come together that you have that price is determined. And so when you have competitive markets, which is a lot of buyers and a lot of sellers, meet competition between them. So let's say that you have a price that is pH. Okay. So at pH, there are more units supplied, which is more units that producers are willing and able to sell than units are demanded, which is the units that buyers are willing and able to buy. And so that difference between the quantity supplied and the quantity demanded is known as excess supply or a surplus. Okay? And so with a surplus, producers have all this leftover goods and services that they can't sell. And so how do they respond? If you're a business, if you set prices and you can't sell everything you're making, what do? You lower the price. And so when there's a surplus, it causes the price to come down. Let's look at the other side of that. Let's say it's at PL here. At PL, there are more units that are demanded than are supplied. And so when you have more units demanded than supplied, you have excess demand or a shortage, which means that producers, sellers, are not able to keep up with everything that people want to buy at that price. And so if you're a business and you are, you're producing things, you're getting ready to sell them, and you're selling them faster than you can make it, what are you going to do? You're going to raise your prices. Right? So again, if there is a surplus, producers will respond by lowering the prices, and if there is a shortage, producers will respond by raising their prices. This will continue in a competitive market until you get to equilibrium, which is the price, PE, in both cases here, such that the quantity demanded and quantity supplied equal each other. With that, the producers are selling exactly as many units as they are producing, as they want to sell. So there's no incentive for them to raise the price or lower it. So that's the basic idea of supply and demand. So let's look at two players here. All right, I'm going to apply supply and demand to it. So you have Hank Aaron and you have Mickey Mantle. All right, these are two players who are Hall of Famers. They are among the best in the game. All right, so let's look at their career stats here. So Hank Aaron had about 50% more at-bats, about 50% more hits, about 20 5% more runs. He had more home runs. He was the home run king for a long time. Many more RBIs and a better batting average. His card price, when you look at baseball cards, was significantly less than Mickey Mantle. And so if you're someone who knows nothing about baseball, if you're looking just purely at the numbers, you would say to yourself, that makes no sense. Okay? That makes absolutely no sense. Why would Mickey Mantle's baseball cards be worth so much more than 3 times as Hank Aaron's? We're gonna come back to that in a second. So let's look quickly at some factors that change supply and demand. First, let's look at demand. So first one you have is consumer income. Consumer income, for normal goods, more income means more demand. Less income means less demand. If it's an inferior good, it's kind of the opposite. Now, normal goods is the case with the typical product, but inferior goods means that as your income goes up, you demand less. And so an example for that would be something like ramen noodles. If you're in college and you don't have a lot of money, you may eat a lot of ramen noodles. But as you graduate and then you go and you're working a job, you're making a solid income, you're not going to eat that as much. And so ramen noodles tend to be an inferior good. Okay. Now, with sports, New York City and San Francisco teams, they tend to be able to charge the highest prices for their tickets to their games and their merchandise because the income is the highest in those areas. Okay. Something else that affects demand is prices of substitutes and complements. A substitute good is one that you enjoy with yours. And so substitute is one you enjoy instead of. And so hamburgers and hot dogs are substitutes. Complements are goods you enjoy together. And so hamburgers and ketchup, or hamburgers and French fries. You tend to eat them together, and they are complements. Okay. And so, with a specific baseball card, it tends to be a substitute for other baseball cards, okay, in general. And with that, if the price of one baseball card changes, the demand for the others will change as well. Looking at sports, something else to consider is how other teams. So if you have baseball and hockey and basketball, let's go with basketball and hockey since they play around the same time. So let's say that the price of basketball tickets goes up. Well, people may decide because the price of basketball tickets went up, to demand fewer basketball tickets, but demand more hockey tickets. Okay. Something else that impacts demand is consumer taste. This can depend on a lot of factors, and a lot of it has to do with how the team is performing and how substitute teams are performing. Right? For example, with baseball. Baseball is a great example because the attendance of baseball games is highly correlated to how good the team is. And so with baseball, if the team is performing well, the demand for baseball tickets will go up. Okay. During the mid to late 2000s, early 2010s, the Phillies were selling out most of their games. The reason being that they were winning a lot of games and people want to see them. Now, as the Phillies have been at best an average team, they are not getting nearly sellout capacity. Okay, and on the other side of that, if you're looking at player salaries, okay, so the supply and demand for players in football, the overall flow of a game has changed, and with that, players have been paid different prices, different salaries, And so football has gone from less of a rushing intensive league where a team will rush the ball more to more of a passing league. And so what you have seen happen is that the average salaries, relatively speaking, of running backs has gone down, while quarterbacks are making much more. Something else that is a big part of demand is the number of consumers. The more people that are in a market watching a team, the higher demand. The New York metropolitan area has a population in excess of 19 million, and because of that, it allows them to have in most sports, I'm trying to think if it's all sports. Yeah, all sports, all major sports, to professional teams. And so in football, they have the New York Giants, New York Jets. Baseball, they have the New York Yankees, New York Mets. Okay. Green Bay, on the other hand, which is a much smaller metropolitan area, with about 300,000 people, just has one team, the Green Bay Packers. Okay. And so the demand in New York is going to be higher than the demand in Green Bay. Expectations that consumer holds. This could be on the team, or if you're looking at baseball cards specifically, if someone expects the value of a baseball card to go up, they'll be more likely to pay. There'll be more demand for it now. And so, just quickly, a couple of things that impact supply. With supply, if the cost of production goes up, becomes more expensive to produce, supply will decrease. It'll shift to the left, as shown in graph 2. Sales tax will have that same impact. And then natural disasters, for example, with the Superdome in New Orleans, which caused the stadium to have damage after Hurricane Katrina, had to shut down, and so that can increase the cost there as well. Elasticity of demand and supply. It's just a measure of how responsive supply and demand is to a change in the price. The price elasticity demand is the relationship between the price of a good and the quantity demanded. And so the price elasticity demand shows for every 1% increase in price, what is the impact on the quantity demanded and quantity supplied in that same realm. So let's go back to the market for Mickey Mantle and Hank Aaron cards for a second. So let's look at Hank Aaron first. So who did Hank Aaron play for? He played for the Milwaukee Brewers, and he played for the Atlanta Braves. Who did Mickey Mantle play for? Mickey Mantle played for the New York Yankees. And so, as we talked about, the market size is going to impact demand. And so the New York market is much larger than the markets in Milwaukee and Atlanta. And so all else constant, a better player is going to have a higher demand for their cards in general. So if both Hank Aaron and Mickey Mantle played in New York, you would likely see Hank Aaron demand the cards for Hank Aaron's cards be valued higher than Mickey Mantle's. But that's not the case. Mickey Mantle played in New York, and so you had a lot more people who wanted his car, so you had that higher demand. And so the supply is the same, since it costs about the same to make a card, but Mickey Mantle, because he was in the New York metropolitan area with more people, was able to get a higher price than Hank Aaron, who was in a much smaller market, so the demand was smaller. So this is just one example of supply and demand, but it can apply to many aspects of sports.